The morning sun cast long shadows across the London street as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic and tall black bearskin hat. At 28, he had been serving as a Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace for 3 years, standing motionless for hours in the scorching heat and bitter cold. Most people saw him as just another tourist attraction, a living statue in a fancy uniform. They had no idea what lay beneath the ceremonial exterior. Marcus had grown tired of the constant jokes and mockery from visitors. Every day brought fresh waves of tourists who would pose next to him, make funny faces, and try to get him to break his stoic composure. Children would tug at his uniform, adults would whisper crude comments about his hat, and teenagers would dare each other to touch him. He remained perfectly still, eyes fixed straight ahead, jaw clenched with practiced discipline. But today was different. Today was his day off, and Marcus had plans that would take him far from the palace gates and the endless stream of camera-wielding tourists. He had received an invitation that both excited and concerned him. His old army buddy Jake Morrison had called him the previous week with an unusual request. "Marcus, mate, you've got to help me out," Jake had said over the phone, his voice carrying a mixture of desperation and embarrassment. "I've been bragging to my new colleagues about my military days, and somehow I mentioned that I knew this incredible marksman. They want to organize a friendly shooting competition at the range this weekend. The thing is, I may have exaggerated my own skills a bit." Marcus had chuckled at his friend's predicament. Jake had always been more of a talker than a fighter during their basic training days. While Marcus had gone on to pursue specialized training, and eventually earned his place among the elite forces, Jake had taken a different path after his service, landing a comfortable office job with a tech company in central London. "So you want me to come along and show off a bit?" Marcus had asked, though he already knew the answer. "Just enough to make me look good by association," Jake had pleaded. "These guys think they know everything about firearms because they've been to a few corporate team-building events at shooting ranges. They have no idea what real training looks like." Marcus had agreed, partly out of loyalty to his friend, but mostly because he was curious to see just how cocky these civilian shooters really were. He had spent years perfecting skills that most people couldn't even imagine, training in conditions that would break ordinary men. The idea of a gentle reality check for some overconfident office workers appealed to his sense of humor. As he walked through the quiet streets that Saturday morning, dressed in casual jeans and a simple black t-shirt, Marcus looked nothing like the imposing figure that tourists photographed daily at the palace. Without his ceremonial uniform, he was just another young man heading out for the weekend. His muscular build hinted at physical fitness, but there was nothing that would immediately identify him as someone with exceptional military training. The shooting range was located in an industrial area outside central London, housed in a converted warehouse that had been soundproofed and equipped with multiple lanes for different types of firearms. Marcus arrived to find Jake waiting nervously in the parking lot, checking his watch and adjusting his collar repeatedly. "Thank God you're here," Jake said, relief evident in his voice. "They've been here for 20 minutes already and they're acting like they own the place. One guy, David, has been going on about his collection of vintage rifles and how he's been shooting since he was 12. Another one, Simon, keeps talking about his scores at the local gun club." Marcus nodded calmly, his trained eye already assessing the situation through the large windows of the facility. He could see several men in expensive casual wear, examining various firearms with the kind of confidence that usually came from limited experience and unlimited ego. They moved with the swagger of people who had never faced real consequences for overestimating their abilities. "What exactly did you tell them about me?" Marcus asked as they approached the entrance. Jake winced slightly. "I may have mentioned that you were in the military, but I didn't go into details. I figured it was better to let your shooting do the talking. They think you're probably just another weekend warrior who likes to play soldier at the range." The electronic chime of the entrance door announced their arrival, and Marcus immediately felt the weight of several pairs of eyes evaluating him. The group of men near the counter turned to look at the newcomers, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. Marcus maintained his neutral expression, the same blank face he wore while standing guard at the palace. "This must be the famous army friend Jake's been telling us about," said a tall man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch. His tone carried just enough mockery to be insulting without being obviously rude. "I'm David, and this is my usual weekend crew. We're always happy to welcome new shooters to our little group." The others introduced themselves with similar levels of barely concealed condescension. Simon, a stocky man with gold-rimmed glasses, made a point of mentioning his membership at several exclusive shooting clubs. Richard, who looked like he spent more money on his appearance than most people earned in a month, casually dropped references to his expensive custom rifles and premium ammunition. Marcus shook hands with each of them, noting the soft palms and manicured nails that spoke of comfortable lives spent far from any real danger. Their confident postures and easy smiles reminded him of tourists at the palace who assumed that anyone in uniform was there for their entertainment. "So, what's your experience level?" David asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer would disappoint him. "Jake mentioned you had some military background, but we get a lot of guys here who think basic training makes them expert marksmen." Marcus simply nodded and said, "I've had some training. Looking forward to seeing what you gentlemen can do." The group exchanged knowing glances, the kind of look that passed between people who were certain they were about to demonstrate their superiority. They had no idea that the quiet man in jeans and a t-shirt had spent years mastering skills they couldn't even comprehend, or that his some training included operations and achievements that would never appear in any public record. The shooting range buzzed with activity as David's group began setting up their equipment with theatrical precision. Each man seemed determined to showcase his gear, laying out custom cases and handling their weapons with exaggerated expertise. Marcus watched quietly from the side, noting how they positioned themselves to be seen and admired by other patrons of the facility. "Right then, let's start with something simple," David announced, pulling out a sleek pistol that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, standard target shooting at 25 meters. "Nothing too challenging for our first round." He glanced at Marcus with a patronizing smile. "Don't worry if you're not familiar with this distance. We can move you closer if needed." Marcus simply nodded, accepting the basic rental pistol that Jake had arranged for him. The weapon felt familiar in his hands, though it was far removed from the specialized equipment he had trained with during his years in special operations. The others made a show of checking their custom grips, adjusting their stance, and discussing the merits of their expensive ammunition. Simon stepped up to the firing line first, spreading his legs wide and extending his arms with deliberate precision. "Been working on this stance for months," he called back to the group. "My instructor says I have natural talent." He fired his first shot, and the electronic scoring system displayed a respectable 7-ring hit. The group erupted in enthusiastic applause and congratulations. Richard went next, producing similar results with slightly more ceremony. He took his time between shots, making small adjustments to his grip and breathing with the kind of theatrical concentration that suggested he'd watched too many action movies. His shots clustered around the 8 and 9 rings, earning more praise from his companions. David's turn came with even more fanfare. He had spent considerable time explaining his custom trigger modifications and the premium Swiss ammunition he preferred. His shots were indeed impressive for a recreational shooter, with 3 hits in the 9 ring and 2 in the 8. He turned back to face the group with obvious satisfaction, clearly expecting recognition for his superior performance. "Not bad for a warm-up," he said, though his tone suggested he considered it quite excellent indeed. "The key is consistency and understanding your equipment. It takes years to develop this kind of precision." He looked directly at Marcus. "Your turn, soldier boy. Let's see what the army taught you." Jake shifted nervously beside Marcus, clearly worried that his friend might struggle to match the impressive displays they had just witnessed. The civilian shooters had demonstrated genuine skill, certainly better than average recreational marksmen. Marcus could see the concern in Jake's eyes and gave him a subtle nod of reassurance. Marcus approached the firing line with the same measured pace he used during his guard duties at the palace. No ceremony, no theatrical preparation, just steady movement toward his position. He raised the rental pistol without fanfare, his stance natural and relaxed rather than the rigid positions the others had adopted. The first shot surprised everyone with its simplicity. No long pause for breathing exercises, no visible tension or dramatic concentration. Marcus simply aimed and fired with fluid motion that looked almost casual. The electronic display showed a perfect 10-ring hit. "Dead center in the bullseye, lucky shot," Simon muttered, though his voice carried less confidence than his words. Marcus fired 4 more rounds in quick succession, each shot finding the exact same spot in the center of the target. The electronic system registered 5 perfect 10s, with all impacts clustered in an area smaller than a coin. The casual conversation in the nearby lanes had stopped as other shooters turned to look at the remarkable group forming on the target. David stared at the display screen, his earlier confidence beginning to waver. That's quite good for warm-up shooting," he said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier authority. "Let's try something more challenging. Moving to 50 meters with rifles. That's where real skill shows." The group relocated to the rifle range where David proudly unveiled his custom-built precision rifle, complete with an expensive scope and bipod. The weapon had cost more than most people earned in several months, and David made sure everyone knew it. Richard and Simon produced their own impressive firearms, each accompanied by detailed explanations of modifications and accessories. Marcus accepted another basic rental weapon, this time a standard rifle with iron sights. No scope, no bipod, no custom modifications. Jake looked increasingly worried as he compared his friend's basic equipment to the advanced gear arrayed by the others. At 50 meters, the target became much more challenging. David went first again, taking several minutes to set up his bipod and adjust his scope. His shots were methodical and careful, resulting in a respectable grouping that covered about 3 inches. The others offered appropriate congratulations, though the atmosphere had become noticeably more tense since Marcus's pistol performance. Simon and Richard followed with similar preparations and results. Their expensive equipment and careful shooting produced decent groups, though nothing exceptional. Each man took time to explain the factors affecting his shots: wind conditions, lighting, ammunition temperature, demonstrating their theoretical knowledge of precision shooting. When Marcus's turn arrived, he approached the firing line with the same understated manner. He examined the basic rifle briefly, checking the sights and testing the trigger pull. No bipod setup, no scope adjustments, just a quick familiarization with the unfamiliar weapon. The watching group fell silent as Marcus settled into position. His stance was different from theirs. Lower, more stable, with the rifle held in a way that spoke of countless hours of training in real-world conditions. He fired 5 shots in smooth sequence, the reports coming at regular intervals without long pauses between them. The target retrieval system brought back a result that made David's face go pale. 5 holes clustered in an area smaller than a grape, dead center in the bullseye. The grouping was tighter than anything the others had achieved despite their expensive equipment and elaborate preparations. "How did you do that with iron sights?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus simply shrugged. "Practice," he said quietly, setting the rifle down with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the session. The single word carried weight that the others were only beginning to understand. The casual atmosphere of the morning had shifted dramatically. The jokes and casual bragging had stopped, replaced by a growing awareness that they were dealing with someone whose abilities far exceeded their own. David tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled slightly as he began packing away his expensive equipment. The silence at the rifle range stretched uncomfortably as the group processed what they had witnessed. Marcus's effortless precision with basic equipment had shattered their confidence and left them questioning everything they thought they knew about marksmanship. The expensive gear they had spent thousands of pounds acquiring suddenly seemed inadequate compared to the raw skill they had just witnessed. David cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the situation. "Well, that was certainly impressive," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. "But let's try something that really tests practical shooting ability. Moving targets, time pressure, that sort of thing." He gestured toward a section of the range equipped with electronic targets that could simulate various scenarios. Simon nodded eagerly, grateful for an opportunity to redirect the conversation. "Yes, that's where real-world experience matters. It's one thing to hit a stationary target when you have all the time in the world, but combat shooting requires different skills entirely." He paused, realizing his choice of words might not be wise given that Marcus actually had combat experience, while they were just weekend hobbyists. Marcus remained quiet, following the group to the dynamic shooting area. This section of the range featured targets that could move laterally, pop up unexpectedly, and simulate various tactical scenarios. It was designed to challenge shooters beyond basic marksmanship, testing their ability to engage multiple targets under time pressure. Richard had regained some of his earlier confidence as he explained the complex scoring system that awarded points for accuracy while penalizing excessive time and missed shots. "This is where my competition experience really shows," he said, adjusting his shooting glasses and checking his custom holster. "I've won several local matches using this exact setup." The range instructor, a grizzled veteran named Tom who had been observing the group's interactions with growing interest, approached to explain the course of fire. "Gentlemen, this scenario simulates a basic tactical situation. You'll engage 6 targets as they appear, some moving, some stationary. You have 30 seconds to complete the course, and accuracy counts more than speed." David volunteered to demonstrate first, clearly hoping to re-establish his credentials after Marcus's impressive rifle shooting. He drew his pistol smoothly and began engaging targets as they appeared. His movements were practiced and confident, the result of regular training at expensive tactical shooting schools. When the buzzer sounded, his score was genuinely impressive for a civilian shooter. 42 points out of 50, Tom announced. "That's excellent shooting, sir. Well above average for this course." The group's spirits lifted slightly. Here was familiar territory where their training and equipment advantages might level the playing field. Simon and Richard followed with respectable performances, each achieving scores in the high 30s. Their expensive gear and formal instruction had clearly provided them with solid fundamentals. Jake went next at Marcus's insistence, though his nervousness was obvious to everyone present. His score of 28 points was respectable for someone with basic military training, but no specialized tactical experience. The others offered encouraging comments, though their attention was clearly focused on Marcus's upcoming performance. "Your turn," Tom said to Marcus, offering him the basic range pistol once again. "Same course, 30-second time limit. The targets will appear in random order, so you can't memorize the sequence from watching the others." Marcus accepted the weapon with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the day. He performed a quick function check and stepped up to the starting position. The others watched intently, curious to see whether his stationary target accuracy would translate to dynamic shooting. The buzzer sounded, and the first target popped up to Marcus's left. His draw was smooth but unremarkable, not the lightning-fast presentation that action movies had taught the others to expect. What surprised them was the economy of movement. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, just efficient precision. The first shot rang out almost immediately after the target appeared, followed by rapid but controlled fire as additional targets presented themselves. Marcus moved between positions with fluid grace, his footwork precise and purposeful. Each shot seemed to flow naturally from his stance and sight picture, without the rushed desperation that often characterized civilian tactical shooting. When the 30 seconds elapsed, Marcus lowered his weapon and stepped back from the firing line. The electronic scoring system processed his results while the group waited in tense silence. Even Tom, who had seen thousands of shooters attempt this course, seemed curious about the outcome. 50 points, Tom announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "Perfect score. Every shot in the high-value zone completed with 8 seconds to spare." The group stared at the display screen in disbelief. A perfect score was theoretically possible but rarely achieved, even by experienced competitive shooters with ideal equipment and extensive practice on the specific course. Marcus had accomplished it with a basic rental pistol on his first attempt. David's face had gone ashen. "How is that possible?" he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. His expensive training and custom equipment had produced less than 85% of Marcus's score. Simon removed his shooting glasses and cleaned them nervously. "I've been shooting this course for 2 years, he said quietly. "My best score is 44 points, and that was on a perfect day with ideal conditions." Richard stood in stunned silence, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The casual superiority he had displayed throughout the morning had been replaced by a growing awareness that he was witnessing something far beyond his understanding or experience. Tom approached Marcus with professional curiosity. "Sir, I have to ask, what's your background?" "I've been running this range for 15 years, and I've only seen 3 or 4 perfect scores on that course. 2 of them were active duty special forces operators, and 1 was an Olympic-level competition shooter." Marcus considered his response carefully. His cover story as a simple Queen's Guard would not explain the level of skill he had just demonstrated. Palace guards received excellent basic training, but nothing that would account for the precision and tactical proficiency he had displayed. "I had some specialized training during my military service," Marcus said simply, maintaining the same understated tone he had used throughout the day. Nothing too exotic, just more intensive than the standard curriculum. Jake looked at his friend with new understanding. During their basic training days together, Marcus had always been a good soldier, but nothing had suggested the exceptional abilities he was witnessing today. Clearly, Marcus's career had taken paths that Jake had never imagined. The group began packing their equipment in subdued silence, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. The expensive gear that had seemed so impressive that morning now felt inadequate, like children's toys compared to the skill they had witnessed. David made one final attempt to salvage some dignity from the situation. "Well, that was certainly educational," he said, trying to inject some authority back into his voice. "It's always interesting to meet someone with extensive training." Marcus nodded politely, recognizing the attempt at face-saving. He had no interest in humiliating these men further, though their earlier arrogance had been properly addressed. The morning's demonstration had served its purpose, showing them the difference between recreational shooting and professional-level skills. As the group prepared to leave the shooting range, Tom approached Marcus privately while the others loaded their equipment into expensive SUVs in the parking lot. The range instructor's weathered face carried the kind of recognition that came from years of military experience. "Listen, mate," Tom said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I served 22 years before I opened this place. Saw plenty of special operations types come through here over the years. That wasn't just some specialized training you demonstrated in there." Marcus maintained his neutral expression, neither confirming nor denying Tom's assessment. "Just trying to help out a friend," he replied diplomatically. Tom nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But those lads you just schooled? They've been coming here every weekend for months, acting like they own the place, bragging about their gear, looking down on anyone who can't afford custom equipment. They needed to see what real skill looks like." Outside, Jake was engaged in uncomfortable conversation with David's group. Marcus could see his friend's discomfort as the others peppered him with questions about Marcus's background. Jake clearly didn't know how to answer their inquiries about specialized military training or operational experience. "We should probably head out," Marcus said to Tom, extending his hand for a farewell shake. "Thanks for running a professional facility. Not all ranges maintain these standards." Tom's grip was firm and knowing. "Any time, soldier. You've got a standing invitation here. And if you ever want to try our long-range course, I think you'd find it interesting. We've got targets out to 800 meters. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. 800 meters represented serious precision shooting, the kind of distance that separated expert marksmen from true specialists. "I might take you up on that sometime," he said, meaning it. As Marcus joined Jake and the others in the parking lot, the atmosphere remained strained. David was making an obvious effort to appear gracious in defeat, but his earlier confidence had been completely shattered. Simon and Richard flanked him like confused supporters of a defeated politician. "Well, that was quite an education," David said, his voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "You'll have to tell us more about this specialized training sometime." "Over drinks, perhaps?" Marcus recognized the fishing expedition for what it was, an attempt to extract information that might explain what they had witnessed. "Maybe another time," he said noncommittally. "I should get going. Early day tomorrow." Jake seized the opportunity to escape the increasingly awkward situation. "Yes, Marcus has to work tomorrow," he said quickly. "We should definitely do this again soon." As they walked toward Jake's car, Marcus could hear the subdued conversation behind them. David's group was clearly trying to process what had happened, their voices carrying a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. The easy camaraderie they had displayed earlier had been replaced by uncertainty about their own abilities and assumptions. "Christ, Marcus," Jake said once they were safely inside his vehicle. "Where did all that come from? I mean, I knew you were good during basic training, but that was something else entirely." Marcus considered his response as Jake navigated out of the parking lot. His friend deserved some explanation, but the full truth about his post-palace duties was classified beyond Jake's clearance level. "After basic training, I applied for some additional programs," he said carefully. "More intensive instruction, different kinds of scenarios." "What kind of programs?" Jake pressed, his curiosity evident. "That wasn't regular Army training. I've seen plenty of soldiers shoot, and none of them moved like you did in there. The question touched on classified territory that Marcus couldn't discuss, even with his closest friend. His current role as a Queen's Guard provided perfect cover for his real activities, but explaining his actual training would require revealing information that could compromise ongoing operations. Let's just say, some positions require higher standards, Marcus said diplomatically. The important thing is those guys learned something today about assuming they know everything. Jake laughed, his earlier nervousness finally fading. They certainly did. David's face when you shot that perfect score, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And the way they all went quiet after your rifle shooting, I've never seen anything like it. As they drove through London's weekend traffic, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. The civilian shooters' arrogance had been predictable, and their humbling was probably educational for them. But the encounter had also reminded him of the vast gap between his public persona as a ceremonial guard and his actual capabilities. Most people who saw him at Buckingham Palace assumed he was purely decorative, a tourist attraction in an elaborate uniform. They had no idea that beneath the red tunic and bearskin hat was someone with capabilities that few civilians could imagine. The morning's shooting had been a rare opportunity to exercise skills that his cover identity kept hidden. I have to ask, Jake said as they stopped at a traffic light. What exactly do you do when you're not standing guard at the palace? I mean, where do you practice shooting like that? Marcus smiled at his friend's persistence. There are training facilities available to active duty personnel, he said truthfully, though the specific nature of those facilities remained classified. Marksmanship is considered an important skill for guards, even ceremonial ones. The explanation satisfied Jake's curiosity without revealing any operational details. Marcus had become expert at providing truthful but incomplete answers to questions about his duties and training. It was a necessary skill for someone whose real work existed in the shadows, while his public role played out in broad daylight. As they approached Jake's neighborhood, Marcus's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The brief text contained nothing that would seem suspicious to a casual observer, but Marcus recognized the coded language that indicated a briefing scheduled for the following evening. His weekend break from operational duties would be ending soon. Thanks for coming today, Jake said as he pulled up to Marcus's flat. I know those guys were acting like jerks at first, but you really opened their eyes. They'll probably be a lot more humble next time they visit the range. Marcus nodded, gathering his jacket from the back seat. Sometimes people need to see real skill to understand how much they don't know, he said. Today was educational for everyone. As Jake drove away, Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a moment, appreciating the quiet afternoon. Tomorrow he would return to his ceremonial duties, standing motionless while tourists photographed him and children tried to make him laugh. None of them would suspect that the silent figure in the red uniform possessed skills that could put him among the world's elite operators. The irony was not lost on him. His most effective camouflage was hiding in plain sight, playing the role of a decorative soldier while maintaining capabilities that his public role concealed perfectly. Today's shooting had been a reminder of both his true abilities and the importance of keeping them hidden from curious civilians who might ask inconvenient questions. Monday morning arrived with typical London drizzle as Marcus walked through the palace gates, transforming back into his ceremonial role. The red tunic felt familiar against his shoulders, and the weight of the bearskin hat settled into its accustomed position. Within minutes he had assumed the statue-like posture that would define his next 4 hours of duty. The irony of his situation struck him as, always, standing perfectly still while tourists photographed what they assumed was a simple ceremonial guard, unaware that they were looking at someone whose weekend activities would have astonished them. The shooting range felt like another lifetime as he focused on maintaining perfect military bearing. His first visitors of the day were a family of American tourists, complete with matching souvenir t-shirts and oversized cameras. The father immediately began the familiar routine of trying to get Marcus to react, making faces and gestures while his wife captured everything on video. "Come on, soldier boy, give us a smile," the man said loudly, clearly performing for his family's entertainment. "Bet you can't even hold a real gun with those fancy gloves on." Marcus maintained his 1,000-yard stare, giving no indication that he had heard the comment. If only they knew, he thought. remembering Saturday's perfect scores with basic equipment while civilian shooters with expensive gear struggled to match his precision. The family moved on after a few minutes, replaced by a group of teenage students on a school trip. Their teacher was attempting to provide historical context about the Queen's Guard, while the students were more interested in seeing if they could make Marcus blink or flinch. "Miss, are they real soldiers or just actors?" one boy asked, stepping closer to examine Marcus's uniform with obvious skepticism. "They're real soldiers," the teacher replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain herself. "They undergo extensive training to serve in this position." If she only knew how extensive, Marcus mused, remembering the years of specialized instruction that had prepared him for duties far more complex than ceremonial standing. The extensive training was accurate, just not in the way the teacher imagined. Around midday, Marcus noticed Jake approaching with two other men he didn't immediately recognize. As they drew closer, he realized with some alarm that Jake was accompanied by David and Simon from Saturday's shooting range. His friend wore an expression of barely contained excitement, while the other two looked nervous and intensely curious. "There he is," Jake said proudly, pointing toward Marcus's position. "My friend the Queen's Guard. Told you guys he was the real deal." David studied Marcus with new understanding, his gaze taking in the ceremonial uniform with obvious surprise. "That's really him? The same man who outshot all of us on Saturday?" Simon shook his head in amazement. "I never would have imagined. He looks so formal, decorative even." Marcus fought to maintain his composure as the three men positioned themselves for photographs. The situation was unprecedented in his experience. People who had witnessed his true capabilities now seeing his cover identity in action. The compartmentalization that normally protected his operational security had been compromised by Jake's well-meaning but dangerous decision to connect his weekend activities with his palace duties. Jake began explaining to his companions about Marcus's military bearing and discipline, clearly proud of his friend's service but completely unaware of the security concerns he was creating. David and Simon listened with newfound respect, their weekend humiliation now viewed through the lens of having been bested by a genuine professional. "The precision it takes to stand that still for hours," David observed quietly, "and the discipline. It makes sense now. The shooting wasn't just technical skill. It was mental training as well." Marcus wanted to signal Jake to move the group along, but any deviation from his standard behavior would be noticed by the tourists and staff who monitored the guard's conduct. He was trapped in his role, forced to maintain perfect stillness while his carefully constructed operational security crumbled around him. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with David and Simon asking Jake detailed questions about Marcus's background and service history. Jake, flush with pride and completely oblivious to the classified nature of his friend's actual duties, began embellishing stories about Marcus's military training. "He's always been modest about his service," Jake said, warming to his subject. "But after Saturday, it's obvious he had some serious specialized training. You don't develop that kind of skill with basic military instruction." Simon nodded thoughtfully. The way he handled that dynamic shooting course, it was like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Professional level, not recreational. Marcus felt a growing sense of unease as the discussion continued. These civilian shooters were drawing accurate conclusions about his training level, but their speculations were taking place in full view of palace security cameras and within earshot of other tourists. Any unusual interest in a Queen's Guard would be noted and investigated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake led his companions away from Marcus's position. But the damage had been done. His weekend activities were now directly connected to his palace duties in the minds of people who had witnessed his true capabilities. The clean separation between his cover identity and his operational skills had been compromised. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus noticed increased attention from the palace security staff. His supervisor, Sergeant Major Williams, appeared twice during his shift to observe from a discreet distance, an unusual occurrence that suggested someone had reported the earlier conversation. When his relief arrived at the end of his shift, Marcus was directed to report to the security office before leaving the palace grounds. The request was phrased politely, but it carried the weight of official inquiry. Sergeant Major Williams was waiting in the small office, along with a civilian in an expensive suit who introduced himself simply as Mr. Carter from the security department. Marcus recognized the type. Intelligence services, probably MI5, responsible for monitoring threats to royal security. Guardsman Thompson, Williams began formally. There was some unusual interest in you today. Civilians asking detailed questions about your background and training. Care to explain? Marcus had anticipated this moment since Jake's ill-advised visit. Sir, I participated in a recreational shooting activity over the weekend with some friends. It appears one of them brought associates to see me today, possibly to verify my identity. Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly. And during this recreational shooting, did you perhaps demonstrate abilities that might have surprised these civilian participants? The question was carefully phrased but unmistakably pointed. Marcus realized that his performance at the range had probably exceeded what would be expected from a standard Queen's Guard, raising questions about his actual training and capabilities. I performed adequately, sir, Marcus replied carefully. Nothing beyond what would be expected from someone with proper military instruction. Carter's slight smile suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Marcus's modest response. Guardsman Thompson, your service record indicates some interesting gaps in your training history. Periods of specialized instruction that aren't fully detailed in your standard file. The conversation was entering dangerous territory. Marcus's cover as a ceremonial guard was being probed by people who clearly suspected that his actual duties extended far beyond standing at palace gates. His weekend indulgence in demonstrating his true skills had attracted exactly the kind of attention his operational security was designed to prevent. The silence in the security office stretched uncomfortably as Mr. Carter studied Marcus with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to reading between the lines of military records. Sergeant Major Williams remained at attention, clearly aware that this interrogation extended beyond normal palace security protocols. Guardsman Thompson, Carter continued, opening a thin file that Marcus recognized as a sanitized version of his service history. Your marksmanship scores during basic training were excellent but not exceptional. Yet according to witnesses at the shooting range, your performance on Saturday was remarkable. Marcus maintained his military bearing, knowing that his response would determine whether his operational cover remained intact. Sir, I've continued to practice during my service. The Queen's Guard maintains high standards for all skills, including marksmanship. Carter's expression suggested mild amusement at the diplomatic non-answer. Indeed. And this continued practice, where exactly does it take place? The standard palace training facilities don't typically produce the level of precision that was demonstrated. The question probed directly at Marcus's classified activities. His real training took place at facilities that didn't officially exist, under the supervision of instructors whose identities were protected by multiple layers of security clearance. Revealing any details would compromise not just his own cover but potentially ongoing operations. Various military ranges, sir, Marcus replied, maintaining his careful vagueness. I take advantage of opportunities when they're available. Sergeant Major Williams shifted slightly, and Marcus caught the subtle signal that suggested his superior was aware of more than he was letting on. The realization that Williams might be part of the operational structure added another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. Carter closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Guardsman Thompson, I'm going to be direct with you. The civilians who visited today were sufficiently impressed by your weekend performance to begin asking questions about specialized military training. One of them, David Morrison, has connections in the defense industry and access to information that might allow him to pursue these questions further. The implication was clear. Marcus's cover could be compromised if civilian curiosity led to unofficial investigations. David's background in defense work meant he might have access to databases or contacts that could reveal classified information about special operations personnel. Furthermore, Carter continued, your friend Jake Morrison has been somewhat indiscreet in his enthusiasm about your abilities. He's made several phone calls since Saturday, describing your shooting performance to other friends and colleagues. This kind of attention is precisely what we try to avoid. Marcus felt a sinking sensation as he realized the full scope of the security breach. Jake's innocent pride in his friend's abilities was spreading through civilian networks, creating exactly the kind of chatter that intelligence services monitored for security threats. Williams spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Thompson, you understand that your current position requires certain discretions. Your recreational activities cannot compromise your primary duties. The phrasing was carefully chosen but unmistakably clear. Marcus's role as a Queen's Guard was secondary to other responsibilities that required absolute secrecy. His weekend indulgence had endangered operational security in ways that extended far beyond his personal situation. Yes, sir, Marcus replied simply. I understand completely. Carter opened another folder, this one noticeably thicker than the sanitized service record. Given the current situation, we need to consider our options. Your friend Jake Morrison appears to be planning another shooting excursion for next weekend. This time with additional participants who are curious about your background. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, imagining the cascade of complications that would result from another public demonstration of his capabilities. Each civilian who witnessed his true skills would generate more questions, more phone calls, more attention from people who might connect the dots between his ceremonial role and his actual training. Sir, I can decline the invitation, Marcus offered. Avoid any further civilian contact that might compromise security. That might actually make the situation worse, Carter replied thoughtfully. Sudden withdrawal from social activities would be noticed and commented upon. It might generate even more curiosity about why a simple ceremonial guard would need to avoid civilian shooting competitions. Williams nodded in agreement. The attention is already focused. Complete avoidance might signal that there's something significant to hide. Marcus found himself in an impossible position, continuing to socialize with civilians who had witnessed his true capabilities would generate more security concerns, but suddenly avoiding them would create even more suspicion about his actual role and training. Carter tapped his fingers on the desk, clearly considering various options. There is another possibility, he said slowly. We could arrange for you to demonstrate more typical performance in future civilian encounters, show limitations that would be consistent with standard military training. The suggestion was professionally sound but personally distasteful to Marcus. After years of maintaining peak performance standards, deliberately shooting poorly felt like a betrayal of his training and abilities. Yet he recognized the operational necessity of downplaying his capabilities to protect his cover. How would that be explained? Marcus asked. The performance on Saturday was witnessed by multiple people. Sudden deterioration would be difficult to justify. Injuries are common in military service, Williams suggested. A shoulder problem, perhaps, or hand injury that affects fine motor control. Something that would explain decreased accuracy without compromising your ability to perform guard duties. Carter nodded approvingly. That could work. Medical documentation would be provided to support the cover story. Your civilian friends would witness a gradual decline in performance. That explains the difference between Saturday's exceptional shooting and more typical results going forward. Marcus realized they were discussing a complex deception operation designed to manage civilian curiosity about his true capabilities. The irony was not lost on him. His weekend attempt to help a friend had generated a security situation requiring professional intelligence tradecraft to resolve. There's one more consideration, Carter added. Your friend Jake Morrison will need to be managed carefully. His enthusiasm about your abilities is the primary source of security concern. He needs to believe that his initial assessment was exaggerated or that circumstances have changed. The personal cost of the operation was becoming clear. Marcus would not only have to deceive strangers but also manipulate his closest friends' perceptions to protect operational security. Jake's pride in Marcus's abilities would have to be slowly undermined through deliberate failure and manufactured limitations. I understand, Marcus said quietly, accepting the professional necessity while recognizing the personal price. Carter closed both folders and stood, indicating that the meeting was concluding. Guardsman Thompson, you'll receive detailed briefings on the cover story and implementation timeline. This situation illustrates why operational personnel must maintain strict separation between their professional capabilities and civilian social interactions. As Marcus left the security office, he reflected on how a simple favor for a friend had spiraled into a complex counterintelligence operation. His weekend at the shooting range would now require weeks or months of careful management to contain the security implications of his momentary lapse in operational discipline. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at the same shooting range where his troubles had begun, this time wearing a fabricated medical brace on his right shoulder and carrying documentation of a training injury that existed only in carefully constructed files. The elaborate deception felt wrong on every level, but operational security demanded the sacrifice of personal pride. Jake had been confused and concerned when Marcus first mentioned the shoulder problem, expressing guilt that his friend might have aggravated an old injury during their weekend outing. The genuine worry in Jake's voice made the deception even more difficult to maintain, but Marcus understood that his friend's emotional investment in the lie would make it more convincing to outside observers. David's group had returned as expected, this time with 3 additional civilians who had heard second-hand accounts of Marcus's exceptional performance. Their curiosity was obvious as they studied his shoulder brace and listened to Jake's explanation of the medical situation that had developed since their last meeting. Recurring injury from military training. Jake explained to the newcomers, his voice carrying the kind of authoritative sympathy that made him an unknowing accomplice in the deception. Been giving him problems for weeks now. The doctors say it might affect his shooting for quite some time. Marcus nodded along with the fabricated medical story, hating every moment of the performance but recognizing its necessity. The shoulder brace was uncomfortable and designed to restrict his natural shooting stance, ensuring that his marksmanship would appear genuinely compromised by injury. Tom, the range instructor, approached with professional concern as Marcus signed the liability waiver with his left hand, making a show of favoring his supposedly injured right shoulder. "Sorry to hear about your injury, mate," he said quietly. "Take it easy today. No point aggravating anything for recreational shooting." The kindness in Tom's voice made Marcus feel even worse about the deception, but he maintained the performance. "Just want to see if I can still hit anything," he replied, allowing a note of frustration to enter his voice. "Been weeks since I've been able to practice properly." David's group watched with mixed expressions as Marcus struggled with the basic pistol, his movements noticeably restricted by the medical brace. The fluid precision they had witnessed before was replaced by awkward adjustments and visible discomfort as he attempted to find a stable shooting position. His first shots were deliberately poor but carefully calculated to appear realistic, given his supposed injury. The electronic scoring system displayed hits in the 6 and 7 rings, respectable for an injured shooter, but a dramatic decline from his previous perfect performance. "Bloody hell," Marcus muttered loud enough to be overheard, expressing the frustration that someone with his actual abilities would feel at such poor results. The emotional response was genuine even if the cause was fabricated. Simon approached with obvious sympathy. "Maybe you should take more time to heal properly," he suggested. "No point pushing through pain for recreational shooting." Marcus appreciated the genuine concern even as he resented the need to exploit it. "I'll be fine," he said, maintaining the stubborn attitude that would be expected from someone struggling with compromised abilities. "Just need to adjust to the limitations." His rifle shooting was even more dramatically affected, with the shoulder brace preventing him from achieving proper shooting positions. The tight groups he had produced 3 weeks earlier were replaced by scattered impacts that barely qualified as acceptable accuracy. The watching civilians exchanged glances that mixed disappointment with concern for his condition. Jake's distress was evident as he watched his friend's struggles. "Marcus, maybe we should call it a day," he suggested after Marcus's 3rd consecutive poor group. "You're clearly not comfortable yet." The suggestion provided Marcus with an opportunity to end the session while reinforcing the medical cover story. "You're probably right," he agreed, setting down the rifle with obvious frustration. "This isn't working like it should." As the group prepared to leave, David approached Marcus privately. "Listen, I wanted to apologize for our attitude when we first met," he said quietly. "We were acting like know-it-alls, and after seeing what you could do, we realized how ignorant we actually were. I'm sorry your injury is preventing you from shooting the way you obviously can." The sincere apology made Marcus feel genuinely guilty about the elaborate deception, but he maintained his cover. "Appreciate that," he replied. "Sometimes injuries remind us that nothing lasts forever. Have to adapt to new limitations." Over the following weeks, Marcus continued the carefully orchestrated decline, attending social events where his shooting performance remained consistently poor. Medical appointments were documented and shared with appropriate people, creating a paper trail that supported the injury narrative. Jake's initial disappointment gradually evolved into acceptance of his friend's new limitations. The security situation stabilized as civilian interest in Marcus's exceptional abilities faded, replaced by sympathy for his supposed medical condition. Phone calls and conversations about his remarkable marksmanship were replaced by discussions of injury recovery and adaptation. The operational security breach was successfully contained through professional deception and personal sacrifice. 6 months later, Marcus received new orders transferring him to a different position within the Special Operations community. His cover as a Queen's Guard had served its purpose, but the civilian attention generated by his shooting demonstration had made the identity unsuitable for continued operational use. On his final day at Buckingham Palace, Marcus stood in his red tunic and bearskin hat for the last time, reflecting on the ironic turn his career had taken. A moment of personal pride and desire to help a friend had ultimately ended one of the most effective covers he had ever maintained. The lesson about operational security was one he would never forget. Jake visited that evening to say goodbye, still believing in the medical story that had protected both their friendship and national security. "I'm sorry the injury never fully healed," he said as they shook hands. "Maybe someday you'll be able to shoot like that again." Marcus smiled at his friend's optimism. "Maybe someday," he agreed, knowing that his exceptional abilities would continue to serve in shadows where they belonged, protected from curious civilians who might ask inconvenient questions about ceremonial guards who shot like special operations professionals. The morning after his transfer, Marcus reported to a nondescript building in London, where his new assignment would keep his true capabilities, properly classified and far from shooting, ranges where weekend warriors might witness skills they weren't meant to see. His brief moment in the spotlight had taught him that sometimes the greatest professional strength lay not in demonstrating exceptional abilities, but in keeping them hidden from those who would never understand their true purpose. The red tunic and bearskin hat were returned to stores, but the lesson about operational security would remain with him throughout his career. Sometimes helping a friend required sacrificing personal pride, and sometimes protecting national interests meant deceiving the people you cared about most. The complex moral calculations of intelligence work had been learned through personal experience at a shooting range where laughter had turned to silence, and silence had ultimately protected secrets that were more important than personal recognition.